I'm going to do this thing. I'll explain it to you as I record it. Okay. So that tells you how important it is. I want this outtake material.
Yep.
So you're going to make this thing. It's kind of like a FM rock and roll station ID kind of thing, where you're doing a station ID for my show, and you're a rock and roller like Alice Cooper, or, Ozzy Osbourne or whoever.
Should I smoke a bowl first?
Yes, please. Let's do that together. But
Ready, mate?
there you go. So it would go something like, hey, this is Michael Anderson from whatever URL you want to say. And you are listening to Jeff Smith on Vroom, Vroom, Veer. Get out there, or something funny, So whenever you're ready, we're already recording. So go ahead and do take one and do as many takes as you like.
What's up, everybody? It's Michael Anderson with ThatAndersonGuy.com. You're listening to Jeff Smith on Vroom, Vroom, Veer. Oh, my God, watch out for that deer.
And it rhymes with Veer. That was perfect. All right, I'm going to hit stop. I'll be right back.
Cool.
Are you ready to thoughtfully steer away from your revved up, frenzied, and far too often scripted life? Then welcome to Vroom Vroom Veer with Jeff Smith, where he guides you down the road differently traveled by sharing unique experiences with guests who have managed to shift away from a life stuck on cruise control and veered their way into a more authentic and fulfilling one in all sorts of interesting and kind of remarkable ways. Get ready to Vroom Vroom Veer with your differently traveled road chauffeur, Jeff Smith.
Steve Haffner, thank you so much for being on Vroom Vroom Veer, and welcome to the show. How's it going, man?
Oh, it's going great. Thanks for having me, Jeff. This is going to be a lot of fun.
I think so. That is always my goal, just to have a good time and maybe learn something, but definitely have some laughs. So
For sure.
I love the website because, Steve Haffner, stevehafner.com. You got lucky.
Yes. Yes, I did. I know a lot of people who'd
love to
struggled to figure out what to make their domain because somebody's already took their name.
Right. Exactly. Well, I couldn't be jeffsmith.com because, there's a lot of famous Jeff Smiths and none of them are me. There's another Jeffrey Smith spelled just like my Jeffrey Smith who's on jazz radio here. And he's got a song that gets heavy play, and it's called Happy. So on my radio, I literally see my name Happy. it's like I succeeded, and I'm on the radio, and it's not me. Isn't that great?
So that's not the pop song Happy?
No.
That was popular a few years back?
it's an instrumental song.
Okay.
Yeah, it's an instrumental jazz song by Jeffrey Smith, and apparently it's Happy. After I see my name and then see the song's name, then I'm totally out of it. So I couldn't even tell you how the tune goes. But if you're interested, go check it out. Anyway, so as I mumble along here, let's talk a little bit about what's going on over at stevehafner.com that you're excited about today.
Oh, well, one of the things I like about what I do, which is professional speaking now, is I'm kind of what they call industry agnostic, meaning that, what I talk about is pretty universal to human beings.
Correct.
So I can speak for HR groups. I can speak to trade associations and manufacturing, textile rental groups, you name it,
Gotcha.
and I love that. I love getting to get in with a new group, find out what their problems are, what issues they're challenging, and maybe some of my insights can help them with that. So
that's pretty cool. Because all humans have the same brain, more or less.
Right. We have the same secret stuff going on in the background that we're normally not aware of. That's for sure.
Yeah. And so I know this is Vroom Vroom Veer, so we eventually have to go back in time.
Yeah.
But I want to just digress proactively here because I love the topic. Cognitive biases and all this stuff. And it came on my radar, I want to say probably maybe like the early teens, maybe 2013, 2014, somewhere around there.
Okay.
And I think I heard Scott Adams talking about persuasion and hypnosis.
Yep.
And I went down the rabbit hole. So he had this thing that he posted on his webpage called the Persuasion Reading List. And it was all these books about all the different cognitive biases. And I wasn't interested in what you're doing, which is learning and using the tools. I was totally wanting to learn defense. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you
to avoid being influenced or persuaded without you realizing.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes. One of the big books was Influence. There you go.
Right. Yeah, it's on my shelf, and I'm sure many of those books that he mentioned
are on your shelf as well.
Are on my shelf too.
Yeah. But he really, really opened my eyes, and it made my life a lot easier. Like now, when I want to cancel cable, I'm not afraid to make that call. I'm okay with it.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought we were a little late cutting the cord, but we did it eventually.
Well, it still happens. I've been off cable TV for a long time, but like anytime you want to cancel anything now, like if you want to change internet companies because you found a better deal, they always ask you, can you tell us why you want to cancel your account? And I go, the only reason I need is I no longer choose to pay for this service. That's the only reason I'm going to provide. And they don't have a counter for that one. They usually just cancel your service at that point, right? Because if you say anything else, if you say anything else, if you give them a reason like, oh, I found a better deal, they're going to try to talk you out of it. Right. Okay.
Right.
So you are Steve Haffner, and before you became this expert in all things cognitive biases and started telling people and doing magic tricks and having a good time, you grew up somewhere. So where did you grow up?
I did. Well, when I was 6 years old, my dad got transferred. We had lived in Ohio and got transferred here, actually, to Louisville, Kentucky.
Okay.
After college, I moved away, but I ended up coming back here to Louisville, which is where I've lived now for, 30 years now, something like that.
Okay.
But yeah, so I grew up in Louisville, and I always had a very creative side, or the innate desire to express myself creatively. So ever since I could pick up a pencil, I was into creative writing. I would write poems and short stories and songs. That was kind of a weird thing for a kid, but it was fun for me.
Yeah.
And then I was also into performing on stage, so I would get into plays, and it's kind of funny because I was a pretty shy child. But
interesting.
Getting on stage with a script, knowing what I'm going to say, allowed me to break out of that. And express myself.
Okay.
Even if it was somebody else's words.
I've heard this before, though. I've heard this before.
Okay. Yeah. So I love performing. Yep.
Yeah.
So it's funny. You think with those two creative side things that were my interests, that were driving me, creative writing and performing, that when it came time to pick a major that I would study in college and a career, I picked computer science.
Of course you did. Of course.
Yeah, but it was interesting because my parents were. So I had taken one computer programming class in high school, and this was burgeoning as far as something they teach in school. This was back in like 1980.
Okay.
And
so those computers were pretty different.
Oh yeah.
1980. Yeah. Let me see here. Where was I in 1980? I have to think about that. So I was in 6th grade. I had a computer, I think, in 6th grade. I think I had a Commodore VIC-20.
Ah, yeah.
That was a great computer.
I had a TI-99 4A.
TI-99.
Texas Instruments one.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So
were you coding on there?
So I was a little bit. They had basic, the language basic.
I do know. Yep.
That you could do. And there were other attachments you could buy to it to get more robust.
Like assembler
into that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but anyway, trying to get a job in computer programming was going to be much easier. I'd make more money than trying to do something in the performing arts. And I did like programming. So, my mom would say, look at all these ads for computer programmers in the paper.
Right.
So I decided that's what I would do. So went into computer science, got a degree, had almost a 30-year career going down that path, and don't regret it at all. It was a great career. There were ups and downs, but
right.
But it was good for me. I really, really enjoyed it.
So what sorts of things? 30 years is a long time.
Yeah.
But I bet like IT is just so varied. Were you like a developer? Were you a little bit, you were always a developer?
No, well, I started as a developer,
okay.
Writing code. And then I had always worked for big companies, and I found this smaller company that looked like a really good fit. I was a little nervous how stable is a company that is that small. There were like a dozen people in it. But I thought, well, I want to try. This will be fun. This will be something different for me. And that I ended up having that job for longer than any other job that I had.
Okay. Wow. And with this tiny little company.
Yeah. But I got to take on more roles besides just being a programmer there. I instituted the QA system. So I became more in the leadership realm. I actually ended up with the vice president of performance measurement systems at that company.
Yeah.
So and then they got bought by a big out-of-town company. Right. And that ended that. Well, I didn't like quit right away, but over time,
the culture changes.
The culture changes. There were a lot of issues. I don't want to go into those, but I ended up getting a job doing something I'd never done before, which was I was a business analyst for a big insurance company.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they use the term business analyst. It was more project management, I would call it.
Okay.
But, I had made the decision earlier to go more into management than technical. Not sure that was a great decision. But then I had that job, and I wasn't loving it, that business analyst position. But along the way, this was probably 20 years into my 30-year career, I discovered magic. It was because I was in a bookstore and just going through the clearance rack, and they had a book on magic. I had a couple my kids were young at the time.
Right.
And when I was a kid, I was really into magic. That was my thing. I loved it. But I grew out of that phase or whatever, and didn't really think about it much until I saw this book and thought, hey, I wonder if my kids would like magic as much as me. So I bought the book, still have it, and I learned some tricks, and the kids kind of liked it. I mean, they seemed to enjoy it, but I really liked it. And I figured out the reason is my creative side. I got to use it, actually. To do magic, you have to write creatively because you have to create your own routines if you want to be any good.
Right.
And I was performing, in front of people. You get to interact with them. And so that's like, wow, this is great. So it became a hobby. I joined the local magic club, did some charity events, birthday parties for my kids and that kind of thing. And so then I had the thought, wow, wonder if I could make a living doing this.
And you still had a job. This was 10 years. Oh, yeah. You still had 10 more years to practice before you.
Okay. Approximately.
Okay.
Yeah. Good at subtraction. I think it was probably about 7 or 8 years.
Okay. That's fine.
Since I've rounded some numbers.
Yeah. You're fine.
But yeah. So I had this up, and I had that little voice saying, hey, maybe you could do this as a living, people that do magic for a living. The market here is not saturated. I wonder if you could do this, So it was something I really wanted to do. But as soon as that voice telling me to do that came up, the other voice on the other side said, are you kidding me? What are you thinking? You've got a stable, high-paying career. You've got a young family to support.
Right.
Grow up. You're going to do magic tricks.
Quit screwing around and get back to work.
Right. Be an adult. Right. Mm-hmm. So I kind of put that little fantasy dream aside, let the other voice win, but it was still there. And as I changed jobs, as I kind of described a little bit earlier, going from one place to another and doing different roles, I was liking my job less and less. And I was feeling less of a good fit for it. And then I actually had a situation at the company I worked for where we thought the company was going to have to close in a year because they lost the one contract that drove their business, their entire business. It was a military contract.
Yeah. Okay.
So I thought when that happened, I'm like, oh, everybody's like, well, we got to update our resumes. And I'm like, I know what I want to do. I want to be a magician.
And the voice came back.
Yeah. It came back, and I say, so that's when a year into that job, I made the dubious decision to quit my entire career to do magic tricks. And when I say dubious decision, those weren't my words; they were my wife's words. So,
Been there, done that. Done that. Yes.
Actually, that's a joke I make because she was supportive, or I wouldn't have done it. But
okay, good for you. You got lucky.
Yeah. Right. So, so that's what I did. Walked in my boss's office, and said, "I'm quitting to become a magician." And I got.
Did he laugh?
Well, it was a she for one. You sexist.
Sorry. Did she laugh?
She was surprised. She knew me pretty well. She knew I, enjoyed doing magic.
Okay.
So, but her boss, the director of the department that I was in, because I thought, well, maybe he would laugh or at least think it's ridiculous or thinking I'm having a midlife crisis or something.
Sure.
But he didn't laugh, but he smiled and he said, you know what? He said, I wish I had a passion that I could make a living at and bolt from the corporate world as well.
Right.
So that made me feel good, because it was almost like he was admiring me for doing this. And the funny thing is, I've never been much of a risk taker. That's never been part of my DNA.
Right.
And, so this was a pretty big risk. But,
yeah.
I had safeguards. It wasn't like it was an irreversible decision. I could have reversed it at any time.
Yes, you can always go back and get another job. Right.
So, and that's something, I talk about problem solving and decision making in my programs. And that's something when you're looking at alternatives for solving a problem, think about the ones that are potentially reversible.
Sure.
Or that you can implement in a small scale to see if it works before, going all out with it.
Right. And don't burn bridges. I think I always quit nice, What you don't have to I know I told my wife this story the other day. My very first almost real job, it was actually my second job, but this was the job that I burnt the bridge on. Like my very last day, the boss asked me to stay extra 5 minutes to do a little bit extra work. And I puffed up my chest and said, no, it's my last day and I'm leaving now. And just because I was 16 and stupid. But I'd already quit, right? I was just like, why an extra 5 minutes, And the guy literally right there was like, okay, just remember, don't burn bridges because you're going to want to get another job and then I'll be a reference and I'll remember this. And I went, well, too late. I've already done it. As it turns out, I never tried to get a job again in my hometown. So I got lucky.
There you go.
After that, I never burnt a bridge. But
that's good. You learned it early.
I did it.
Yeah.
At 16. I learned. So, okay. So I have questions because that's a huge decision right there. And you already said that you had these, voices in your head, right? One's like, magic. I wonder if I could make it go. Right. And then you're like, yeah, but you've got a mortgage and you've got to pay for your kids' college and whatever else, right? You've got to be a responsible adult. So how did you get over that and talk yourself into taking the leap?
Yeah, well, it was hard. It was very hard.
It is.
If you have a big decision that's going to have a big impact on you and potentially other people,
right?
And you don't know which way to go, that it can be painful. And I was really struggling with that because I really wanted to do this. I felt for myself to use my God-given talents. I needed to make this jump. And, I don't think I would regret doing it as much as I would regret not doing it.
Makes sense.
Yep. At least trying it.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. If it all
But
goes to shit, you can always go back and get a job and say, well, that didn't work out. At least I gave it a go.
Right. But it is so I was really struggling with this. And then one day I had driven to work. I was sitting in the parking garage and I was just sitting there and I wasn't getting out. And I was thinking about this life decision. Should I do it? Should I not do it? And there's a true story. I heard a song on the radio that I had never heard before. In fact, I've never heard it on the radio again since. It was the one and only time. And while I was sitting there in the car thinking about this, some of the lyrics to the song were, there comes a time when you have to ask yourself, where am I going? What have I done? Are you taking the orders you've been given, or are you breaking the rules with your own decisions? Isn't it time you tried?
That's
my
great.
Gosh.
That's
it
great.
Just hit me. It was like a tsunami of, I don't know, emotion hit me. And, I had tears and I'm not a crier. And I'm like, what's happening to me? And really, it seems it was a sense of relief, right? Because I now knew what I wanted to do. I was totally on board with that message. And I knew inside I was on board with it. I just I needed a catalyst, I guess, something, needed to hear it from somebody else.
Yes. Yeah.
Somebody
that random song on the radio.
Right.
So thank that artist.
Yes. Thank you. Martin Sexton is his name. And the song is called Living the Life. And I've looked it up on YouTube since then, I'm like,
great.
Where's that song that had such an effect on me? And I had to look it up, but yeah, so I made the decision at that point and, told my wife I'm doing it and off we went. And I gave a good cushion, a month, maybe. I think I gave a month notice at work and, and that would give me time to start working on my business and building the website and reaching out to potential clients and that sort of thing while I still had a paycheck coming in.
So more questions. So did you have the idea to do corporate gigs immediately or was that an afterthought? Or were you just going to go do just magic shows kind of thing?
Well, when I went into it, I knew that was an option. There's lots and lots of different markets that magicians can work in. But I had to decide on one to start with. And I thought, I may decide to expand into corporate. So I started off doing kids shows, preschools, birthday parties, festivals, fairs, family audiences as well.
Sure.
I'd go into schools and do magic shows about healthy eating or respect.
Sure. There's your creative writing thing coming in. Yeah.
And I had to tie it into an educational message, for the schools to be interested in it.
That's perfect practice for corporate gigs, though.
Well, kids,
because they're looking for all kinds of topics.
Yeah, right. It was really, really good for me when I became a speaker to be able to make those kind of connections between content and entertainment. Right. But there was a limit. I guess an obstacle that I had not anticipated was that physically it was pretty demanding because you had to do a lot of shows because kids shows the amount you can make per show is going to be pretty small compared to corporate gigs. So you had to do a lot of them to have a decent income, right?
Sure.
And, and it was more physically demanding than I thought, especially birthday parties, because if they ordered the deluxe show, I had all this stuff I had to carry and I had a bad knee and that was starting to wear on me a little bit. And I'm like, and I'm only, making $200 for this. And
there's a lot of investment of energy on my part here for this, not so much payoff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I was getting older, and my knee condition was getting worse. And I just thought, what's the best way to increase revenue without having to increase the number of shows and wear and tear on my body that I have to do, and two things, corporate entertainment was one. Another was trade shows. So I don't know if you've ever been to a big trade show where a booth will have some sort of entertainment, something to draw people in.
Sure.
A magician
Booth
is
babes.
a really, really good booth babes, right? But magicians are still politically correct. So,
yes. Sorry. Booth babes do exist still, right? Am I wrong?
I'm not sure.
I've always heard of booth babes. I was never big on trade shows. So
yeah. But magicians are a really good option, but it was a tough sell because there's a stigma about magicians, and some people just automatically didn't want it associated with their brand, even though it's even though you tie the brand into the presentation. Anyway, so I made a decision. I was going to go after trade shows. But here's what I did. This was key. I said, when I hit June 30th, so 6 months into the year. So I gave myself about a year, I believe, to work on this. June 30th, and I put it on my calendar. I said, if by this date I'm not making at least half of my income from trade shows, then I'm going to stop.
Okay.
I'm going to pivot, and I'm going to pivot into speaking, because those were the two areas I was thinking of going to. And I hated cold calling, and that's what, to get trade shows, that's what it took. It took a lot of cold calling, and
so that's like you have to do 10 calls to get 3 gigs or whatever the multiple.
Way more than that.
Way
more than that.
Gotcha.
I would be making 100 calls a day, and
get one. Okay.
Get one in a month, or something.
Yikes.
Like that. And because people don't answer their phones, and like I said, there's a stigma with, if they hadn't seen a magician work effectively in a booth, they had trouble imagining it, I guess.
Yeah.
So anyway, so the date come, I didn't reach the goal that I wanted. I had done a few trade shows, but not nearly what I wanted to. And that's when I made the pivot into speaking. And here's another thing you talked about, or you mentioned corporate entertainment, is that as I would prospect and I would do lead generation, I'd find all these events in the region. And I'd reach out to the people having the events. Well, very small percentage of those events actually have entertainment budgets. Okay. Most of them don't. But they all have education budgets.
Right.
They almost all want keynotes, and they want them to be entertaining and engaging and energizing. So they want entertainment. They just can't call it that.
Right. So, exactly.
Right. So I had thought over the years, when I had considered going into speaking, I had given some, ran a lot of ideas through my head on what I would speak on. Really, when you're a magician, you have to understand how the audience's mind works.
Sure.
What it's doing, how I can guide it in certain directions where I want it to go without them realizing that I'm doing that. So I had to learn about all these subconscious impulses, because magic doesn't actually happen in the magician's hands or on the stage. Mm. That's a technical thing that they're doing to deceive you. Right. The magic happens in the audience's mind.
Right.
So that's why. And I discovered a lot of the things that we don't really recognize that are going on, the magicians know about and manipulate and exploit to give the perception of magic. Right. But they also affect us every day in our thinking and decision-making and problem solving. And if I could bring to light some of these things and offer some strategies on how to overcome them or veer around them.
I thought, them. Well said.
Yeah.
Good job.
Yeah. For some reason, that word just popped into my head.
Yeah, I don't know how I get there. Yeah.
Yeah. So I started, put together programs. My first speaking engagement was horrible because it was my first speaking engagement.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I learned a lot about constructing a program. Were
you doing like a keynote or more of an educational thing?
It was a smaller group. It was a local chapter of an organization.
Okay.
It wasn't a keynote as far as a big part of a bigger conference. Mm-hmm. It was a program for a monthly meeting. So, when I think of keynote versus like breakout session, breakout is usually more detailed and a little more intimate, and you get a little more interaction. So But in style, it was more of a keynote. But anyway, I wasn't happy with it, and I got the impression that, I mean, they didn't say it, but that they weren't all that happy with it either. And, and rightly so. So I actually backed off from speaking for a while after that.
Really?
And then I decided I got to get back on this horse. I joined the National Speakers Association.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah. In fact, I was the president of our chapter a couple of years ago.
Yeah. Right.
So great.
But you're going to learn a lot. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. From all the educational stuff that they put out, videos and conferences and stuff, to just our local meetings and talking to other people that have been successful in the business.
Yeah. Right.
So,
well, you're going to learn, like, I think going in, you had a lot of the sort of like, how do you say that? Like, you knew like the content, right? Like, okay, I'm going to talk about cognitive biases and I'm going to use magic. But what you needed was sort of like the speaker technique, infrastructure, scaffolding kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it did help that I had to build my own corporate. I was in mentalism for corporate audiences. It's a branch of magic.
Right.
And I had to build that out and structure it and think about the highs, emotional highs and lows, and figuring out how to. But speaking is a different thing because of all the content that you're tying into it.
Right.
So I had a lot to learn, and I did, and I'm still learning, and I'm still trying to grow, still trying to become more of the speaker that afterwards everybody wants to bring that speaker to their company or another association.
I get it.
Yeah. So, So it's always going to be a work in progress, and I'm glad it is. I never want to become complacent.
The thing is I think it's the idea, just that little thing where you're going to show them a magic trick and then you're going to break this magic trick rule almost, maybe, I don't know, maybe not, but you're going to try to use the magic to describe something that you want to teach them about, right? Is that
right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're almost going to give them the trick. Or at least a piece of the trick.
Yes. Yeah.
Which I like.
That's generally a piece of it, because I typically in most of my programs, I use a rope trick as an example, and I have a member of the audience help out with it. And I use that to illustrate how easy it is for us to get distracted.
Right.
And what I did as a form of misdirection to make them miss the secret move that I did right in front of their face.
Right.
So after we did the trick, I go back and I talk about it. And I said, here's where I had to, and I show them the secret move, and that doesn't show them the secret to the whole trick. And a lot of people have said, still don't know how you did that, even after I showed them this.
Right.
And it's a trick that's in the public domain. It's been out there forever. And
so you're not breaking any magician rules or anything.
Right. So then I go back and I talk about when I did this, here's why I did it, and here's what your brain was doing at the time.
Right.
So, for example, during the trick, before I have to make the secret move, and everybody's attention's on me, even though I've got somebody from the audience up with me, because I'm the magician. I'm holding the props. They want to make sure they don't miss anything. They want to try to catch me out, right?
Right.
So at that point, when I needed to make the secret move, I say to the spectator on stage, I say, I meant to ask, what's the biggest lie you've ever told?
Right. So everybody looks at them. Right.
Exactly. As soon as I ask that question, I'm not the most interesting thing on the stage anymore. That person is.
Yes. So you have about 2 seconds to do something secret.
And all I have to do is basically move my thumb like that is the whole move.
Okay. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And so it's really easy, to do it in that time frame. But, so now as soon as I ask that question, that guy is the most interesting thing up there. So even though I was the most important thing in the context of the trick, I got them to switch their attention really easily.
Right.
And then I describe, well, why does that happen? Why are we is it so easy for our attention to be taken away from what's important to us? Well, it's because that's how our brains are built.
Right.
And then I get into the things that about with cognitive biases, and all that. And our brains, we have that part that is built for survival. All it cares about is safety and security, system one, so to speak. And, and it can it has a big part in how we allocate our attention. So even if we're consciously focusing on something like you and I are right now,
right?
If there was a contrast or a change in the environment, there's a noise or something walked by, you're going to look. That part of your brain doesn't ask for your consent. It just doesn't say, hey, should we put our attention here? Right? It just happens.
Right. Yeah.
And then it's your conscious brain that has to decide what to do next with your attention. Right. But because our brain is always on the lookout, trying to keep us safe, anything that could be potentially dangerous, that's why we're so easily distracted. And magicians know that, and that's how they use misdirection.
Yeah.
To easily distract us.
Have you ever seen that video? I don't remember what the context was. I want to say it was on like a Magic for Humans, maybe that show on Netflix, where they're like, they've got like these really young, attractive people throwing a basketball around, right? And you're totally fixated on this. What's going to happen, right? And then they say, "Did you see the guy in the gorilla suit?" Right. And I go, "No." And they rewind and they go, okay, now stop watching the ball and wait for the gorilla. And I was like, holy crap. So this guy in the big gorilla suit walks through the middle of it and, he does a little dance in the middle and then just walks on by. Totally missed it. I was like, oh yeah, I love that. I love it when people point out like things I missed.
Flaws in our brains, right?
Totally.
Yeah, I mean, I totally, when I first saw that one too, I, didn't see the gorilla at first.
No.
It's called attention blindness, right? And we have all kinds of blind spots.
Totally. Yeah.
And that's why it's so important when we're making big decisions or solving problems that we engage a team, even if it's just a team of you and one other person.
Yeah, maybe.
Because it's very difficult for us to see our own blind spots. That's why they're blind spots.
Yeah.
Our own, when we have cognitive biases, that we're succumbing to, that are affecting our thinking and decision making. It's tough for us to recognize it, but studies show you can more easily see them in other people.
Yeah.
That means they can more easily see them in us too.
Right.
And so you can help each other through those blind spots and maybe uncover some of them if there's more than one of you, right?
Totally.
Especially people from different, if you have more diversity and experience and background, and perspective, somebody that comes at things from a different angle than you do.
Right.
So anyway, just thought I talk about that a lot too, the value of teamwork. So just wanted to throw that in there.
When you said that, the first thing that came to mind was I took a course in podcasting, and now I can't remember the dude's name, but he was the guy that made Gimlet Broadcasting, and he used to be on NPR, and I'm totally blanking on the dude's name. So I'll go look it up later. I'll put it in the show notes. But anyway, so this guy has this class on one of those online class platforms, right? Where you can just go and watch him, and you pay $100 or whatever you pay. And he talks about podcasting for several hours. But in that, like one of the, maybe across more than one class, that he used the audience of like 30 people. He had a studio audience where he recorded the class, and they together produced like an episode of like, This American Life, right?
Oh.
Yeah, with a woman on stage who is the subject, right? And then he was just saying, so this is how we do it. First, we would do this, and we try to come up with the most interesting questions that we could ask this person, right? And we're trying to figure out what's the best story that we could tell, right? And watching those 30 different people brainstorm on that, I was like, oh, that's what people are talking about when they're saying like the power of the group mind kind of thing,
Uh-huh.
It was just genius. I was like, one brain's awesome. 30 brains are, 30 times better.
Yeah. And here's a helpful hint when it comes to brainstorming is before you have your brainstorming session, have all the individual, determine what your main problem is you're trying to solve, or, what you're looking for, ideas, and have everybody come up with their own list individually first before you get together as a group. Because sometimes when you get together in a group, especially if there's a manager or a leader there,
right,
people turn into yes men and it becomes groupthink and they're less creative.
Oh, yeah.
And
so
then
you worked with the military, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
So anyway, so that helps brainstorming if each person does it on their own first and then brings their ideas to the table and no ideas are off limits.
Are bad. Right. It's kind of I had a colonel, right, and so full bird, and he's in the room with it's a staff meeting, right, and he somebody bought this a sample of remember when the quality movement moved through the DoD and the Air Force, so there was quality, right, that thing that started with Deming and then went to Japan, and they tried to do that in the Air Force. So somebody went out and bought a bunch of coffee cups with Q's as the handle. And the colonel lifted this cup up in the meeting and went, "Does anybody look at this mug? Isn't this the dumbest mug you've ever seen? What do you guys think of this mug?" And everybody was like, "Well, that's the dumbest mug I've ever seen." Because of who's saying it. Yeah.
Right. You gotta agree with the big guy.
Exactly.
Right?
That's the dumbest mug I've ever seen. Unfortunate. Yes. So, okay. So let's talk a little bit about some of these. What are some of your favorite like cognitive biases that you like to teach people out of or about one or the other?
Well, the one that is generally or often regarded as the biggest is confirmation bias.
Okay.
Which is the fact that when we have a belief, we are more concerned and put more effort into feeling right than we are being right. And that means we look for information that will confirm our belief. And we discard information that runs counter to that belief. Say, you like a certain political party or candidate.
Right.
Stuff comes up on your feed. If it's positive towards that candidate, you're more likely to read it and share it or whatever. And if it's not, you're likely to dismiss it as fake or false information.
Right.
Right. So that's confirmation bias. We want to feel right, and we hold on to our beliefs even in the face of contrary evidence.
Right. It's like the opposite of science.
Right. Exactly. So,
right.
I don't know if you're familiar with Adam Grant.
Adam Grant. I've heard that name.
Yeah, he's a psychologist, and he's written several books. And this one I read a couple of years ago when it came out. Think Again.
Ooh,
and it's
nice.
all about the power of knowing what you don't know, and having beliefs but held loosely enough that you're willing to change them if other information becomes available.
Right.
Right. But people generally don't do that. So that's a big one.
No, they don't.
Right. So confirmation is big, and there's a lot of like sub cognitive biases under that. But the one I teach about the most, because it's pretty insidious, is status quo bias.
Okay.
So we have a tendency to prefer the status quo, not just beliefs, but so the definition is status quo is the existing state of affairs.
Right.
So not just beliefs, but also what you do and how you do it, especially the things that you've been doing for a really long time.
Right.
Yes. That's the status quo. And we actually have what I call an unholy allegiance to the status quo.
Well, I did too. I did. You did. That's why you didn't want to let go of that job.
Exactly.
Right.
Good. Exactly. Good connection. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nobody quits their job to become a magician. That's crazy.
That would be silly. That would be irresponsible.
You're supposed to stay in the same career your whole life, right?
Right.
So what, but that comes from that, and I call it the lizard brain, although I know it's not a specific brain part, but that functionality in your brain to try to keep you safe. All about survival, because what is safer? What feels safer? Doing what you've always done, that you know how to do it. A lot of things you don't even have to think about because you've been doing it for so long, or trying something new. where there may be threats that you don't think about or know about and challenges that you've never had before. That's scary to your lizard brain.
It's scary to the whole brain, but yes. Extra scary. Yes.
So we have this impulse to stay with the status quo, even when it's not the best option and other better options are available.
Right.
And if you think about status quo as being the incumbent. In the congressional elections in the U.S. in 2022, do you know what percentage of incumbents won their races? Take a guess if you don't know.
As it turns out, I read that blog post on your webpage, so I think it's. So yeah, I cheated. I what was it, like 98? It was something crazy.
Yeah, 98.
98.
I had been using, I had been using the 2020 election, and it was 96 at that point. But the
98's better.
98. I mean, that's insane. And the fact that there's no term limits is like, what?
I know. It bothers me.
Yeah. So incumbency is a huge advantage for a number of reasons, but one is people are used to it and they like the feeling of continuity. Change requires energy. Our lizard brain is about conserving energy so that we have it when we need it to fight or flight. Right? Yeah. So it's about conserving energy, and it takes a lot more energy to do something different, to look at available options, to figure out what the important criteria are, weigh the criteria, score, all that stuff that goes into effective decision-making and problem solving, you can save all that, just stick with the status quo. Oh, well, status quo is obviously not as good of an option as often as we think. Now, I always have to say this caveat. I'm not an advocate of change for the sake of change.
No.
Status quo is often the best option, and here's the thing. It earned its spot as the status quo because it worked. At least it did when you implemented it. Right. But a lot of us have habits and at the organizational level, systems and processes and procedures that we've had in place for a long time, and they did work. But over time, the environment changes. There's a lot of different variables that come into play.
Right.
And maybe they don't work as well. Maybe they're not as efficient, or maybe they're not as effective at doing what they once did. Right. So I'm always recommending, number one, take a look at where the problem areas are and see if there's other potential options that could be as good. And then when you are weighing different or comparing different alternatives, including the status quo, make sure you have your list of criteria and you're going to score all of them based on that criteria. And this helps to remove that extra bias we have towards the status quo. Right. If you're making a conscious, deliberate, intentional effort to score everything on individual criteria.
Yeah. Doing those scorecards, the weighted scorecards, I found that that's huge,
Right.
Yeah.
And it can give some surprising results too, especially when you weigh them, because ease of use might be the most important criteria for buying a new system to do something, accounting system or whatever. And it may be higher than price, you have a number of criteria. Well, when you weigh them, you can get different results than if you just added up the scores without weighing them. Right. And sometimes people are surprised and they, think, well, I thought what we were doing was a pretty good option, but apparently not.
Yeah. And then the other thing you said too was make sure you're not doing this by yourself. I think that's huge.
Yes, it is. Absolutely. Yeah. And you want to make sure that you get, you have to identify people who are going to be affected by the change. If you're going to change a status quo process, because people don't want to change. People are afraid. They don't want to lose something that they have. So you have to make sure that you involve somebody, at least a representative of all the different groups or areas that are going to be affected by it.
So how long did you spend working with the military? Just out of curiosity.
Well, and my direct work with military was limited. I mean, had some meetings, of course, but I was working more within my department. And we had a subcontractor doing work for us. So I worked with them. So I wasn't working that directly with the military. But I was in that job for a total of 2 years.
Okay.
So,
So it didn't last very long. Well,
no, because a year into it is when they lost the contract.
Gotcha.
And that's when we all had to.
Right. I remember that. Okay.
Yeah.
So what I was in the Air Force 20 years, right? So I was very, in the military is it is what it is. A lot of it's great. A lot of it is crazy. I speak from experience, but the change thing was a lot different than like the Department of Energy. I worked for the Department of Energy. Like after I retired a couple times, I got another job with the Department of Energy, and going in, I'm just thinking, well, it's just another federal agency, right? They're all pretty much the same, completely different, completely different because the Department of Energy, especially where I worked, sort of like the most important people are scientists, and they have a completely different disposition than say like a pilot.
Right. I can imagine.
Pilots just pound on desks and say, make it so, right? They're very Jean-Luc Picard, great guys, right? But when they're the universal manager and they just make a decision, they cram it down everybody's throat. It's like, I'm the general, do what I say, right? Go out and buy new uniforms, whatever, right? So a lot of that, I'm saying this because it's like all changes top down in the military, especially in the Air Force. It's just like, it's being imposed on you, and you're like, okay, I'll change. Ow. Right. And you don't really have a choice.
Right.
Right. But the DOE was completely different, like they just, it was all just like, well, it felt weird, there was no top down direction. Like changes just sort of happened because they had to.
Interesting.
Right. It was like, well, this happened. Now we have to change. Right. It was like, there's this new threat in cybersecurity. We have to change. Right. It was all external. There was nobody in the DOE, coming down and putting their thumb on you and going, you must do. Right. It was a different corporate kind of feel. Anyway. Sorry.
Interesting.
I digress.
Sounds like there was a lot of reacting that has to be done to external forces in there.
Yeah.
All the changes were responses to something else that was happening.
Yeah. And it's almost like the generals in the military just decide to be weather, and they can because they have that kind of power, It's like, they become the weather. It's like, I see something coming, therefore go do, and they can. Yeah. So anyway, the other thing I was going to say about status quo is, have you ever heard this? Like, how like if you're making cornflakes, every once in a while you have to say, new and improved frosted flakes, right? And you always in your product development, right? And everybody thinks, oh, that's got to be a hard job coming up with something completely new, right? That status quo bias thing, I think that applies to new products too. Like new music, new TV, new like art that's popular, like new products, new shoes. They change very, very little. Probably like that 2% that you were just talking about, right? It's like very, very, it's like you have to make it look a little different, but mostly the same. Like the show Car Talk on NPR. Did you ever listen to Car Talk?
I was just talking to my wife about it yesterday when I was telling her I just got an oil change, and Click and Clack said that I could wait 5,000 miles instead of the 3,000 miles that they told me.
What I like about Click and Clack and Car Talk, I mean, one of the brothers died, and that's sad. So they're reruns now, but like 98% of that show was exactly the same. The only thing that was different was who calls.
Right. Yeah.
And we love it.
I always enjoyed listening to that.
Yeah, me too. Especially the credits at the end. And they were always the same. I tried to memorize them as much as I could.
The credits were always the same. I was thinking they changed them a little bit every time.
They would add. They were additive. How's that sound?
Okay. Dewey, Cheatham, and Hal.
Dewey, Cheatham, and Hal. Right.
Yeah.
they would add, like, the name of the producer kept getting new names, new nicknames. Sweet Cheeks.
There you go. Well, we had
no free lunch. I don't know.
Since we were talking about the military, I have this one story I wanted to tell because I think it's got a good. I think it's got a good message for people. So, I was about a year into my magic career. I was doing kids and family shows mostly.
Okay.
And the military connection is that this is there's two parts of the story. The first part is about Fort Knox. So I live in Louisville, which is 45 minutes away from Fort Knox, Kentucky, which everybody thinks of as that's where the gold is.
Right.
Which it is, but it's also an Army base. So they have schools for kids. And I had been hired to go out there and perform close-up magic for a fall festival. So I love close-up magic, by the way, for kids, because you get to see when that moment of magic happens right in their eyes, that look of delight and surprise, and they laugh, and it's awesome. And there was a little girl about 8 years old named Stacy, and we were doing my favorite trick for kids is the sponge rabbits. And so there's two rabbits, and one goes in one hand, the other. They change places and move around and stuff. And at the end of the trick, when the child opens their hands, all these little sponge bunnies pop out of nowhere.
Oh, wow.
And so when I did that with Stacy, and she looked at me and she got that look of, delight, she was really excited. And then it turned to a look of curiosity. And she said, Steve-O, because that was my magician name, Steve-O, how did you make all those bunnies appear out of nowhere? And I said, by magic. Magicians can be pretty smart sometimes.
Right.
By magic, of course. And then her look changed to one of hope. And she was like, can you make anything appear? And she said, can you make my daddy appear? And I said, where's your daddy? And she said, he's in Afghanistan. Can you make him appear right here, right now?
Aww.
Yeah, that really, I was like, my smugness went away. And I'm like, I said, I'm sorry, my magic's not that strong. Right. And she was like, well, her look changed again to one of profound disappointment. She said, that's okay. I didn't really think you could. I walked away. So my 45-minute drive back to Louisville that day was tough because I'm like, what am I doing? I said, I didn't quit my career to disappoint children, to make them sad. And what am I doing anyway? I'm basically lying to kids with this magic. I'm deceiving them. And is this really what I should be doing with my life? So I had a lot of self-doubt, thinking maybe I ought to go back to the corporate world, to a desk job.
Right.
Thinking, what do I do? So again, I had two different voices talking to me, but I didn't give up. 2 months later, I was doing table hopping magic at a restaurant. So the magician goes from table to table and entertains people while they're waiting for food.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And it helps the time go faster and gives them a good experience. So I approached this table, and there was a young man about 9 years old and his dad. And I said, hi. I said, I'm Steve-O the magician. I said, would you like to help me with some magic? And he was not sure, but his dad nodded. And he said, okay. And I said, here's one of my skills as a magician. I can tell just by looking at someone the very first time just how important they are. I said, I collect autographs of important people. And I said, what's your name? He said, Thomas. I said, Thomas. Said, I could tell as soon as I saw you that you're one of the most important people I've ever met. I said, you've got big things ahead of you in your life, and that is exciting. I said, would it be okay if I get your autograph? And so he smiled and said, well, okay. So I said, well, here's how magicians get autographs. And I got out a deck of cards. I just showed them all normal, except for one card was blank. And I had to sign his name on the blank card. We did the trick together. We shuffled the cards and mixed them all up. And then we turned them over and his card was gone. So he thought that was pretty cool, And I said, well, what? I said, you know what? I said, because these autographs of important people are pretty valuable, I don't like to leave home without them. So I always keep them here, and I pull out a wallet and I show there's some cards in there, and I've got Lady Gaga and Daniel Radcliffe and LeBron James, and I said, but here, and there's another wallet inside. I said, here's where I keep my most important signatures, autographs. And I open it up, and there's a card you can see through plastic on one side, but the other side's a zippered compartment. And I said, the most important one I have to keep in this zippered compartment. And I pull out, there's a card in there, and I show it to him. and it's his card, and it's got his name. Now he gets really excited. Right?
Wow.
He's like, "Wow, that was
That's
really
a good
cool."
trick.
But I wasn't done. So then I said, "Oh," and I pointed to the card that was behind the plastic. I said, "I haven't shown you this one. You're probably wondering what that one is." I said, "I just got this one a few minutes ago, actually. I was back in the other room, and I saw a woman in there who, of course, I could tell right away she was very important. And she gave me her autograph. And this is hers." And I pulled it out and I showed it to him. And when I showed it to him, his eyes got as big as saucers and his jaw dropped to the floor and he started looking around. The name on the card was Lindsay Butler. His name was Thomas Butler. Lindsay Butler was his mother, and she was a soldier stationed in Afghanistan. And at that moment, she came from around the corner in full fatigues for a surprise homecoming. Talk about a feeling of redemption, right?
Okay.
When they when they hugged, that's when I knew, hey, magic really is real.
It is.
It sure felt that way. So she had called me a couple weeks before then and said she wanted to surprise her kid with a homecoming. She knew I was a magician, and could I make her magically appear somehow?
Wow.
And since I'm not David Copperfield, I did a card trick, right?
Yeah, but talk about full circle.
Right. But what I learned from that is, one, we're our own worst critics and we tend to beat ourselves up. And there are times when we want to give up. When things don't go our way, we screw up or something happens and we just want to give up, whatever it is, our job, a project we're working on, whatever. Sometimes giving up is the best option. We have to let go of some things in order to move ahead.
Yeah.
But before you make that decision to give up, ask yourself, what was it that motivated you to get into that in the first place? It was important to you once because you decided to take it on. So it was and is that reason still valid now? And if you think about that, think, well, if it is still valid, if that reason still can drive you, use that as motivation to push through that barrier so you can, my little tagline, turn that setback into a comeback.
I like that. Yeah.
Yes. So, and the little girl at Fort Knox was probably disappointed for like 30 seconds.
Yeah. She forgot about it before you did.
Right. Exactly.
You know that, but you can't tell that, because I get it. You're going to beat yourself up. That's one of those negative, we always take like a bad news a lot harder. That's the way we're wired,
Exactly. The brain, the brain scans show that negative thoughts and ideas light it up more than positive ones.
It's all about trying to keep our ancient brain self alive, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So negativity gets a higher resolution save in the brain, I guess. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, and we remember those negative things and those embarrassing things that we do, the setbacks, more than we tend to remember the victories and the wins and the ta-da moments in our life.
Yeah. Have you ever thought of the idea of, this just came to mind, so tell me it's a bad idea, but I like doing the practice quit. I quit, but I'm not going to do anything about it. I'm just going to imagine what it would be like quitting. And then Monday, I'll go back to work. Right? It's just what would it be like if I quit? And think about it. Yeah, a thought experiment about like a practice quit. Well, let's really think about it. Like when I was trying to think about whether or not I had enough money to do something, right? Like, do I have enough money to do? I've been doing this thing called Financial Independence Retire Early. If you got to go, just tell me because we're over.
Oh, no, I'm good.
Okay. But, I spent probably like 2 years fretting about whether or not I had enough money and trying to figure out how much we spent on an annual basis down to a really good amount, right? Like a known, say like $5,000, $10,000 range annual spend. And then one day I just went, honey, just go figure out how much we spend in a month and then a year. And she came back 5 minutes later with a sticky with the last 4 or 5 years, like all mathed out. And she showed her work. Wow. And you had that whole time. Just ask, I was like,
Right.
we got plenty of money. We could totally quit. So
Happy ending to that story.
yes. Sometimes, the answer's already there. Just go ask your wife. She probably knows. Anyway, Steve, let's talk a little bit about how folks can get in touch with Steve Haffner, and that's Haffner, and Steve is Steve, SteveHaffner.com.
Yep. That's where I am. You can sign up for a weekly newsletter that I have called Cognizance, where I talk about performance and decision-making, problem-solving, how we think, and a couple other things. I have links to interesting articles and stuff in there. It's a quick read. It's like 3 minutes. Don't try to sell you anything. You can unsubscribe if you don't like it, but
right.
It's a pretty fun thing to have, I think. I have an ebook called 7 Strategies for Making Great Decisions, and they can get that for free from my website as well.
Yeah. Hey, that's great. Steve?
And if anybody's looking for a keynote or an educational speaker, that's what I do for a living. So, and it's
entertaining. It's comedy, it's magic, and it's learning. Right. I tried to tick all the boxes to make it as engaging as possible. And these are things that you need to learn anyway. So, yes, do yourself a favor, check out Steve's stuff. Steve, this has been a blast. Come back anytime.
Well, thank you, Jeff.
Wait really 6 months or a year. Come back. We'll talk more about. I think I could talk to you for just as long as you want.
Well, thank you. Well, the time has just flown by, so that shows how fun it's been.
All right, cool. All right, Steve. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Jeff.
Thanks for taking the time to ride along with us on another episode of Vroom Vroom Veer. For podcast info and show notes, be sure to head over to vvveer.com. That's VVER.com. Man, that's fun to say. And we'll catch up with you next time here on Vroom Vroom Veer.